call this meeting to order, the Montpelier City Council. Our first order of business is to approve the agenda. We're going to make just a shuffle of a couple things because part of the workshop, the TIF workshop, is going to be in private session, so we'll move that to the end. We have two agenda items. We'll just move those up, and we'll do the council reports and so on beforehand, so that people don't have to wait around for us to go out and be in public. So we'll just do that last. And then I think that's it. We have two addendum items. Anything else, Donna?
I would like, probably I don't do this now, but I would like to move the charter amendment found with the clerk out of consent agenda.
Okay, well, we'll just go ahead and do that. That's okay, any other changes to the agenda? Okay, if not, without objection, we'll consider the agenda approved. Next item is general business and appearances, an opportunity for anyone who's here to talk about something that's not on our agenda to do so. I understand we have somebody here. Welcome. If you wouldn't mind just coming up to the mic, introduce yourself.
Hello.
Good evening.
Hi. Thank you for having me here. My name is Sarah Dusterhoft, and I'm an AmeriCorps member serving with the Vermont Youth Development Corps. I'm the team leader for the program, and I serve on the Washington County Youth Service Bureau office right in town. And I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention an event that I've been planning for Martin Luther King Day this coming Monday, January 15th. Every Martin Luther King Day is a day on, not a day off for AmeriCorps members, and AmeriCorps members all across the country, as well as community members, are encouraged to volunteer and be active in their community. So I was responsible for putting together an event in town here, and poster for which I have here. It's displayed around town. There will be a community lunch, a community dialogue, and art project at the Unitarian Church on Main Street, and it'll go from 11 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. So of course the lunch goes from 11 to 12:30, and then at 1 o'clock we'll switch gears to the community event and the art project that will focus on Martin Luther King's legacy, some of the issues facing our community, some of our strengths, and ways that we can continue the efforts of Martin Luther King and unifying his community to remedy some of those issues. I think it'll be a wonderful opportunity to get to know the AmeriCorps members who are, I guess, around central Vermont. We have about 10 of us or so, maybe a few more. So you'll see those faces there, and of course community members as well. I think it'll be a really wonderful time, so if you're able to attend or know someone who would be interested in coming, I strongly encourage and invite you to attend. And I'll leave this poster on the back table, if that's all right?
Sure.
I have a second one, so if anyone wants to take one, post it somewhere they think it would be visible and useful for someone, that would be really wonderful. And I hope to see you all there. It should be good food, good conversation, and I really thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for doing that.
In America, it's a great program.
Yeah,
Really,
it is.
do.
I'm very,
Yeah.
very glad to be part of it.
Appreciate all the work that you all do.
Thank you.
We've had great success with AmeriCorps Vista people in our city.
There's
So
a lot of amount in the area, a lot more than in lots of other states, so that's a
Yeah,
great
it's
coalition.
a great program.
And I'll leave, I don't have business cards yet, but here's my contact information.
we will
I'll put it
soon.
on the poster, so if anyone wants to get in touch with me. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, next item is the consent agenda, so we'll take off item B. Do we have a motion to approve the item A minutes?
I'll move to approve, but I just want to confirm that we will discuss it tonight as it's a timely measure to get it on the ballot. The intent is to make a decision tonight. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
the charter, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Move to approve, less.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we get to the presentation by Central Vermont Public Safety Authority. Welcome.
We're expecting more board members, but
John, could we
If that's the case, could we go ahead and do the
Do
charter amendment?
you want to wait a few minutes while we do a couple other things?
Sure, which,
Think of the
let's see
charter
what-
stuff.
I guess, that's up to.
yeah, sure.
Tim's gonna show up, Tim's gonna show up.
We've got a couple other, I mean, we've got some other things we could do.
Just waiting for a couple of members.
We'll just kind of keep going and raise your hand when you got who you want.
We don't normally move this fast. Yeah.
I'm sure Tom's shocked
We
to hear
start
that.
out, we start out fast, and then we tend to. Okay, Donna, do you have any concerns or issues about the charter amendment?
Well,
Anything
I
you
was
wanna talk
trying
about?
to understand this. Is it everything under $100,000? Or is it everyone is not charged their first $100,000?
The first $10,000 of taxable property, if you have, or I should say, if you have $10,000 or under of taxable property, your bill will be zero. So if you have more than $10,000 of taxable property, then your complete property is taxed at the standard rate. So what it would do is get rid of these really tiny bills that everybody hates. The cost would be to the city between $11,000 and $12,000. Part of the reason why it's a good idea to do it now is that we're expecting much more than that to start coming in for the next tax year from some of these new businesses that are opening. So it'll be more than offset. So what it looks like, I'm going to say this and give away my political colors, which everybody already knows. It's a distribution, really. So it takes the pressure off the really smaller, lower income businesses and leans it a little heavy, just sort of by default towards the bigger ones.
It wouldn't change, though, the rate for the bigger.
It's not going to change the rate. It's just a charter change that would exempt, little tiny businesses that end up with $20, $30 bills.
It would change, it's going to change the rate for everybody by $11,000 for all property tax payers, including personal property.
Well, in the sense that it would be offset.
See, when you say that, you confuse me, Bill. When you say for everybody for the first $10,000.
Well, no. So the numbers happen to be consistent. So there's the value of 10,000
Right.
that we're talking about exempting. That results in 11,000 we won't collect in personal
Right.
property
Yeah, I understood
taxes.
that. Yep.
So all of those are part of the grand list. So when we set the taxes next year, we won't have
Oh, I
that,
see.
that group of, so every,
Okay.
the entire grand list will have to pick up that $11,000, which is 1.12 cents or something like that. And 1 divided by 8, something quick. 125,
Actually,
right?
sure, as written, if
Yeah,
it
that's
worked that way.
Yeah, so, so it would, not only other personal property taxes, but regular property taxes will absorb that difference. That's what I'm saying.
And this is a low enough marker, because one of the pieces we got was a comment about not putting all of it on the bigger businesses. So is it equitable in that way?
Well, I'm not sure what you're asking. It's looking at it from the opposite direction. It's looking at it from.
John wasn't, I'm not trying to cut you off here, but I know what she's referring to.
It
and
was
you
an
weren't-
email we got.
Right, so
Oh.
Jean asked about what would happen if we exempted everybody under 500,000.
Ooh.
And the idea would be more business friendly, and it turns out the bulk of our money is in the 500,000s and over, about 75% of it, but it's only 7 accounts. So I just posed the question: is there an issue of, are you creating a tax for 7 accounts to bring in this money, and where's the equity standard?
Oh,
Burlington.
yeah.
Okay.
I know Burlington, for example, exempts their bottom 40,000. But, I just don't know where that line is drawn, or if there is a.
Oh, heavens, yeah. Then
They're
you just
talking about eliminating all of it, but.
then you're just whopping a tax on a
Right.
very small handful. I mean,
Right.
Okay.
I'm going to get out there and support it, but I couldn't support that.
Right.
I
Well,
think that
so
would-
there's the
Okay.
politics of it, but then there's also the legality. Can we actually do that? Is that
Well, how would that, I don't understand that. We're drawing a line. It's just a matter of where you draw the line.
right? So, but is there? I mean, I don't know. Could they
If
say
you draw
it's
the
an
line too
inequitable
small, then you're going to set up an argument that they're specifically being targeted. This is an arbitrary
tax.
tax that is just targeting them and a few other businesses.
And it's got to go through the legislature too. So,
And the argument may not stand up, but it's an argument to be made, and it could be a compelling one.
and it has to pass the legislature. So.
I'm sorry, Jean, and then
I wanted to go back to the concept of drawing the line, and these questions today, and thank you, Bill, for the info, were really spurred by the question that Burlington is asking about if to charge the personal property tax, if to continue with that, do they want to bring more business into Burlington? What does this tax mean for folks? Does it, and I don't know about this. Do these taxes, for the smaller businesses, would a business think, no, I'm not coming into Montpelier because I don't want to pay $214, which I think is, sort of an average of one of these categories, or is that so small? On the other hand, we see our downtown struggling, and so is this a bit of a carrot?
So,
I don't have the answers. I just thought we should ask.
right. So it's my opinion. This isn't based on any factual study, but I think you're honest. I mean, it's the people with the people that we, in theory, might not be exempting are the ones that actually could be making location, because they're in the thousands of dollars. I know for Caledonia Spirits, for example, they have lots of business personal property, all their tanks and all their equipment, and it was a real factor for them. It was, we're looking at other communities that don't have this, you do. If Green Mountain Power decided to build a new facility, they might say, well, if we build it in Middlesex, we won't have to pay this large tax every year. So it seems to me, I think that's what Burlington's looking at, is completely doing. Barry's done away with it. Other places have. Others haven't. We can certainly get the list of those that haven't. I mean, it's certainly a long discussion. If you're doing it to attract business, my suggestion would be to get rid of all of it, but understanding you're putting $440,000 onto all the taxpayers. You're shifting it from this one group of taxpayers onto the general tax rate, including those people's property taxes too, but it's about 5.1 cents on the overall tax rate.
Yes.
Can I just, as the person who's really pushed this, including going back a year, I am going to express some frustration that I've been talking about this for a year now. The day it absolutely has to go through, we're talking about it. That's a little frustrating, and it'll be frustrating to Steve too. But can I just say put it to the voters. You're not making the decision today. You're talking about putting something to the voters. Let the voters have it. And I would say, don't mess with a good thing. I mean, it's not something designed to bring in business. It's something designed to give a break to our smallest businesses. And that as itself I think it's a good enough cause. We don't necessarily have to pile all of our wish list onto that wagon. But if you like this mechanism, then I would say talk about it again next year. But don't throw out the baby with the bathwater here. This is a nice thing we can do for the small businesses in town, and if we overcomplicate it, boom, we'll just blow it up.
I don't think we're about to throw it out. But I think it's appropriate. The council has to vote on it, and I think it's appropriate for us to have a conversation about it. I don't think that's.
Okay. I mean, it can be done by petition too.
It seems to me that the issue isn't, so to John, I think just to help out here, I don't think the council's arguing about the exemption. I think it's a question of the policy of, do we continue this tax in general, and what are and
But that is such a dramatically different policy
I
question.
understand.
That's
Right.
all I'm saying, is that's a whole other kettle of fish.
Well, or where you draw the line. I mean, you've drawn it at one place. There's an argument to draw that line on a different.
And the higher we draw the
different
line,
set.
the more it's going to shift onto the
I
general.
mean, I'm not
tax rate.
making that argument, but I'm just saying it's not an unreasonable conversation. And I think, Gene, you're the one who raised that. So did you have any?
No,
answer?
I agree with you, John, in the sense that tonight isn't the night that we're going to draw any line elsewhere. I do think, though, the council moving forward can begin to think more broadly about the impacts of this tax and the consequences, and maybe or maybe not make some changes.
So, and just as an example, I think I sent to you, in '98, the city council did propose to the voters to do away with that tax and proposed to phase it out over 5 years, and the voters turned it down by 900 to 1,200 or something like that. So they did put it to the voters.
And I agree with John. I think that this needs to go to the voters. I think that's what our role here is to present that to the city and see what the city has to say. But I too share some of those same concerns. I mean, I guess I'm also struggling with shifting that burden onto property taxpayers, because that means rents are going to go up, and that means other things are going to happen that might be unintended consequences. But I absolutely agree that this is something that should go to the voters. I mean, I think our job here is to facilitate their ability to vote on these things that affect their city directly, and many of them are property taxpayers, so they might be interested in what that means, and they're business owners, and so I do want to revisit the policy conversation, depending on how this vote does or doesn't go. I guess I think it's a worthwhile policy conversation that we as a council need to spend some time thinking about.
I think Justin was first.
Well, I certainly can appreciate not wanting to shift the burden of these taxes onto property owners. An easy way to avoid that would be to contain future budget spending by $11,000, and then it would not be necessary to shift that burden. I'm in favor of eliminating this petty and burdensome tax. It mostly is targeted at small businesses, people who are just getting started, and frankly, I think we would benefit from having more of them here. I would be in favor of exploring future relief, but given the productive and functional nature of this budget cycle in particular, I certainly am not willing to do that at this time, as we're very close to finalizing our budget, and the impact of that would be undue and unfair on the city manager.
I just wanted to add a comment from the economic development study we did, and the consultant that came in, and he said the one thing that he found was that our level of taxing as it is to businesses is not a factor of them not coming here. I mean, it was in the study. So I think this is a fair way to approach it, to start with the smaller businesses. It isn't that I object to it, John, or that I don't want to put it to the voters. I just wanted to talk about it. So I would move that we approve the charter change amendment as put forth. Do I have to go to each one of them?
No, you can do all four together.
Okay.
It's basically moving to the formal action is filing the language of the charter amendments with the clerk. It has to be done at least 10 days before the public hearing, which is in 14 days.
So if I read this here, I make the motion to file the attached charter amendments with the city clerk to replace amendments filed on January 3rd, 2018.
Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. You guys ready to go? Okay. Presentation by the Central Vermont Public Safety Authority.
Do a short PowerPoint presentation. Start.
Speak up, Tom, you're not getting in the mic.
Okay. Thank you, Donna.
I can't hear you, that's really strange, Tom.
You should be used to it by now.
It was a mumbler, wasn't it?
So let me introduce everyone before we start, and then I'll have John, you can turn off the light. But thank you, everyone, for having us. Obviously, this is an update and presentation of our budget request for this fiscal year. A lot has happened since the last time we met. We met with the Berry Council last night, where this plan was received with a general positive vibe. You know, they had some critical feedback that we're taking back to the board to discuss, to see what can make it better, how we can work forward, and how we can sort of come to some conclusions on the role of CVPSA and how it can help with the process of regionalization as we go forward. You know, part of the change in focus or direction that we're going to be presenting tonight came about from a meeting that Bill Frazier, myself, Donna, and Chief Akos and Chief Gowans had about a month ago, where we discussed what would be the role of the CVPSA and how could we be most effective over the next 12 months, and to come to some type of conclusion in this venture, whether it's up or down, or whether we move forward or not. And from that meeting, one issue that has been highlighted continuously has been the need to address infrastructure first, and to be able to control some of the problems that are facing both Berry and Montpelier, as well as Capital West. And I apologize, I've had a cough for the past couple of days, so I'm kind of working through that cold. So from that discussion, we've kind of taken it back to our board, and we come back with a proposal of how we can go forward over the next year. We'd like to do it with no funds needed or no requests from the towns going forward, but we realize that we're probably going to, with the funds we have, and we've been good stewards with the funds that have been allocated from the two towns. We still have about $40,000 left in reserve funds, and we're prepared to use that in this final year to proof of value. With that, we feel that will get us to October, so October, November timeframe. From there, if we're successful, we feel we'll need extra funds. And this proposal really is geared towards that. You know, how do we get, if we are successful in what we're proposing between now and November, how do we get from November to the following June? We could potentially not ask for funds this year, but I think that would be disingenuous to the voters. I think the voters have a duty and an obligation to understand if we feel we're going to go down the path and get to levels where we think we will be, we will need some funds to really push us through and get us to the next level. That being said, we've offered trigger points, exit strategy, that when we get to the point in November where these things aren't working, or we haven't met these obligations, or Capital West hasn't decided to join us as a third member, we can get out and we can give back the money. And so we feel it's better to ask for money and give it back than to not ask for money, be successful in our proposal, and then have to come back to you guys in October and November and ask for a set of funds. So that's the reason for the budget request. From here, I'd like to play a little clip.
Can I ask you just before you go forward about the budget request? Are there any offsetting savings that you're projecting to the city from the revenue that would be raised locally?
I guess
Offsetting savings to Montpelier from the money that we would be allocating. So you're asking for 20, whatever your number is.
Yeah, 25, 28.
28,000?
28,200.
Well, the idea of the authority has always been to consolidate, to gain efficiencies, then reduce by...
Well, it's
reduce the
long-term.
bearing-
The goal of authority has always been
Sure.
to long-term create a system of which we can expand regionalization in police, fire, emergency services, as well as dispatch. It's never been just about dispatch. It's always been about creating a system of where we can not go it alone from Montpelier's perspective. Right now, you're functioning as a regional entity in the police department through their dispatch operations. You have contracted obligations that have limited terms that could end within a 6-month notice from Capital West. I'm not saying that's going to happen. Times could change. As we get closer to the end of that contract term, I think it exposes Montpelier taxpayers to a significant amount of risk. I think what this proposal offers is a way to spread that risk. Does it provide immediate savings for Montpelier? No. I think Berry City had those same concerns last night. However, one of their concerns was raised by Mayor Lawson in that, would the board consider, if this thing is successful, amortizing some of the previously spent costs from Montpelier and Berry over the lifetime to be spread out by the new members, either through bonding or through integration of the single site system or that. So it is definitely a concern that we don't want to be an extra burden forever. We feel there is a finite life to the Central Vermont Public Safety Authority if it isn't successful, and that's why we're offering these exit strategies. So with that, I'll play this clip, and then what we're going to do is we're going to give it over to Paco.
And now we'll bring you a story from
and he can explain our proposal. Paco.
Public Post to VPR's coverage of cities and towns from around Vermont. Vermont's emergency responders rely on radio communications to talk to each other in critical situations, but clear lines of communications are not available in all parts of the state, as VPR's Amy Noyes discovered. That's the sound of a French-Canadian taxi company coming in loud and clear at the Capital West Dispatch Center, located at the Montpelier Police Department. Capital West dispatches 23 fire, ambulance, and EMS services throughout central Vermont on the same frequency as the taxi company. They also share the radio frequency with the Berry City Police Department, which dispatches several more agencies. Scott Bagg is chairman of the Capital Fire and Mutual Aid System Communications Committee, which runs Capital West dispatching. He says all that radio traffic can be confusing.
So it can be very complicated when you're trying to dispatch on a fire emergency, and here comes these Canadian taxi company trying to talk and operate their business, and it overrides our system.
As frustrating as all this radio traffic may be, The situation worsened earlier this year when communications from fire departments in Grand Isle County started coming in loud and clear over that same radio frequency. BAG explains a recent equipment upgrade for the Grand Isle system led to more interference for dispatchers and responders in central Vermont.
They actually attempted to get off our frequency, and they have recently had realized that their system did not work for what they needed. They came back to on our frequency, and their transmissions were overriding our transmissions and became an operating problem.
Fred Cummings is the dispatch supervisor in Montpelier. He says too much radio traffic can lead to dispatchers missing transmissions, and that, he says, can have life or death consequences.
If the transmission that you miss is critical, it could mean somebody is hurt or killed. So that's the concern that we have with everybody being able to talk on the same channel at the same time.
Communications Committee Chairman Scott Bagg says there haven't been any dire consequences yet, but he's afraid it's only a matter of time. And that's why Capital West is looking to switch to a new system on a new frequency. But the switch will take time and money. He says the Federal Communication Commission needs to approve the change, and because it's close to the international border, Capital West will also need permission from the Canadian government. That process could take almost a year. And if they change frequencies, BAG says it's also a logical time to upgrade the Capital West communication system that's been patched together over several decades.
We want a system that is able to transmit and reach all of our towers simultaneously at the same time. And we want our responders, no matter if they're in Cabot or Roxbury, to hear each other and be able to talk to each other through a unified, dedicated system. And it will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to replace.
BAG says Capital Fire and Mutual Aid will apply for a Department of Homeland Security grant and other grants to help pay for the new system. He says he doesn't think it's viable to ask the 17 towns whose departments use Capital West Dispatch to pay for the upgrade.
It would be extremely difficult for all the towns to bear the weight of such an upgrade. I would almost say impossible.
In the meantime, Capital West is making do with a crowded radio channel and a complicated system to reach emergency responders from Cabot to Fayston and Roxbury to Walden. And BAG says it's a problem that's likely to come up in other parts of the state as well.
As more and more technology and radios come available, more and more people are trying to talk on the same frequency. We've run into this problem, and I'm sure that other agencies are going to run into the same problem.
Meanwhile, Grand Isle County fire officials have been in touch with Capital West in Montpelier and say they're making an effort to restrict radio use to essential communications, at least until a more permanent solution can be found. For VPR News, I'm Amy Noyes.
I played not to scare you guys, but it's a reality that's going to face this council regardless if the CVPSA is here or not. You have a contract with Capital West. You will need to partner with them in some way, shape, or form to come up with some way to fix this. And as a taxpayer of Montpelier, I would not like to be the recipient or the person that needs that fourth call or fifth call, because we're having problems with dispatching in Worcester or out in the outer areas because of our contracted services. So the basis of this discussion is not to highlight the problems, but to highlight how we, as the Central Vermont Public Safety Authority, can use this as a way to help to solve a problem, or help to bring the council together with Capital West as a new member. And we have a critical meeting next week. Part of the process has been working with Capital West to join. We had a meeting in December with them where it was unanimously voted at that meeting to pursue discussions with Montpelier and Barrie in becoming members. And one of the problems, or one of the discussion points we've heard loud and clear at the council level says, well, we need another member. And I think Capital West becomes a member that could be an integral partner to help us solve some of these problems, as well as solve some of the common policies and protocols that are required. Montpelier does a great job. We can't do it alone. And I think if you take anything from this message, regardless of what happens with CVPSA over the next 6 months, that will need to be part of your capital equipment budget. It will need to be part of your steady state financing plan. It will need to be considered. How you spread those costs needs then to be part of the equation. So with that, I'm going to throw it over
Can I
to
just ask you a question about Capital West? Would that
Sure.
require a positive vote of every jurisdiction that's a member of that of Capital West in order to join the authority?
No.
So in other words, every select
No,
board?
we've had legal opinion that says they can join it. Paul Giuliani, Paul Gillis has told us that they're eligible to become a
It's
municipal
a
member.
separate entity,
It's a separate entity that has their own funding formula. They'd have to agree through a memorandum of understanding to whatever funding requests we have. And so theoretically, if they become a member, they would be part of the equation. And whatever goes forward would then be split amongst them based on some funding formula that's to be determined.
but it's a separate
yeah.
municipal entity, Capital West?
They have their own municipal entity. We've been given legal advice that they have limited ability for bonding. They've told us they have ability to bond. I think there is some interpretation that needs to be clarified, whether or not they can bond alone or not. If they can't, it would have to even come to Montpelier or some authority that does, whether it's Berry City or the Central Vermont Public Safety Authority. We feel we could be the glue that holds these together and offers a place where issues and ideas can be vetted on a more regular basis than what council usually entails. This has come about from our meetings with Bill, that this could be a highlighted function, that just with Montpelier alone, as we had highlighted before, it really didn't make sense to turn over the employees and cause undue hardship or concern at this point. We still hold true that that eventually would be a logical extension, but we wanted to focus on measurable goals over the next 6 months so we can prove value, and if not, we can jettison the project and view it as a lost cause. So with that, I will turn it over to Paco to present our budget request, and then we can answer any questions.
Thank you. I don't know if you want the PowerPoint presentation.
I think the people at home might. It would be good to have it on the record.
At home, okay. Then I don't know how to activate it. So. I mean, I got it here, but
Who's got the clicker?
Where is it?
oh, there it is.
How does this work? You got it? Sorry.
Signals to come up. James, I don't talk too much.
No, let's see.
Takes a second. Thank you, Mike.
Oh, there it is. Okay, good.
Yep, thanks, John.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for letting us be here. I want to see if I can add just a little bit of clarity to what the chair mentions. It's my understanding about Capitol Fire that they are a municipal district established by law, and as such, they are a municipal entity that would allow them to join the Central Vermont Public Safety Authority. The question about their funding is still at an issue. The question as to whether they can vote as an organization to join our Central Vermont Public Safety Authority is not a question. They can vote independent of funding. They may have to go back and seek funding from their municipal or from their towns if there is an investment. But that is something that we want to continue to pursue and plan for down the road. Now, over the last several months, we have presented, I have been involved with preparing 3 separate plans for dispatching. 2 of them involved what I call the 2-center concept, and those were not well received, and we always left with more questions than we were able to answer at the time. After our last visit, we prepared another plan, and as a result of that, it really boiled down to, or the feedback we got was, the only way to advance dispatching is to look at a single center or single site facility. And there was a strong suggestion from staff that the real problem with communications in Central Vermont is the radio system, as you heard from this clip, which is why we prepared this clip. And it is why we have focused on our efforts the rest of 2018 to develop a single-site dispatching plan and to try and advance the project of developing a analog simulcast radio system. And that's at the heart of the operating budget proposal for fiscal year 19. The funding proposal calls for continuing with an executive director, working on developing a single-site dispatching plan, and advancing the new simulcast radio system while working collaboratively with Capitol Fire and Capitol West. We're going to continue funding the bridge between the Barry City Dispatch and the Montpelier Dispatch Center. It's important to remember that while our budget for fiscal year 19 is level funded at $100,000, we are reducing the appropriation request by 40%. We intend to use $40,000 of reserve funding. That is projected reserve funding. It's not that we have $40,000 sitting in reserve at this point, but we are projecting by the end of this fiscal year to have approximately $40,000 in reserve to put towards the fiscal year 19 budget. That leaves Montpelier's contribution that we're requesting at $28.2 and Barry City contribution at $31.8. Now, we realized that this is our fourth year of funding request, and we realized that we needed to come in with some concrete ideas about what we're going to do for performance, and more importantly, we want to articulate the deliverables that meet those performance expectations. So, as the chair, as Tom has mentioned, we have ongoing talks with Capitol Fire and Mutual Aid System about joining CBPSA. That is one of the deliverables, to have them as a member of CBPSA. Deliverable for the simulcast radio system project is the plan for funding and acquisition of a new system that will be delivered no later than November 2018. A plan for a single-site dispatch center delivered no later than November 2018. We intend to have this legislative and use this legislative session to aggressively track S-273, which is a bill that has been proposed in Senate Government Ops. It deals with a variety of issues to include the removal of the 911 call-taking function from state police and the creation of a public safety planning grant program that would be, the grants would be given to regional planning commissions. And then finally, we want to establish some aggressive, organized public outreach and to distribute the comments and feedback from those public outreach sessions, of which we plan on having a minimum of 3, to include helping to facilitate perhaps a meeting of both city councils again to hear from the city councils relative to their integration, regionalization, and consolidation ideas. The deliverables, there's no magic to the deliverables we're planning towards for the fall, so that we can have a discussion around those plans and a go, no-go decision to coincide with the beginnings or the fiscal year 20 budget process. Along with the performance expectations, we have realized that we need to articulate an exit strategy and what's going to happen moving forward. The deliverable is all the reports and plans should be delivered to the city councils for action by November 2018, and no action or not moving forward in any way spells no further work by the Central Vermont Public Safety Authority. I've established I've put up here a couple resources. This is a link via simulcast radio system to the audio that you just had, and that is our website. And that's pretty much a summary of our budget proposal for fiscal year 19, establishing why we're asking for it and what we intend on presenting with the funds.
Thank you, Donna.
Paco, would you please explain why is that bill in the Senate so important? I don't think it was clear why we care about that bill.
Oh, well, it leads to, we expect that it will lead to a discussion about the state police at least getting out of the 911 call handling business, which will mean that the Enhanced 911 Board will have to redistribute how the 911 call handling function will be handled in Vermont and who will handle it. And I think we in Central Vermont need to be very mindful and watchful of where the 911 calls in Central Vermont may go and be handled. Along with that, I expect that there will be a discussion concerning dispatching and the cost of dispatching by the Vermont State Police and to whether they will get out of the dispatching business for municipalities or whether they will charge municipalities for that service. That's a game changer for many, it's a game changer for 105 municipal agencies that are currently being dispatched for free by the Vermont State Police.
One of which is Berlin?
One of which is Berlin.
That's why I feel that's
And I'm glad you're pursuing that. It seems to me just to be just an incredibly inequitable system.
It is.
Begs
correction, in my view.
It's always been the stumbling block for us when I hear people talk about trying to increase the market.
Yeah, we get this freebie, so why would we pay if we get it for free? It's that simple. It's just not fair.
It's been the huge stumbling block in adding new municipal members, particularly the local municipal members. Why should we pay when we're getting it for free?
So if there are no other question for the authority, I'd be interested in hearing from Tony, if you're able, just to respond in part because so much of this is premised on what is viewed as a flaw or vulnerability of our existing dispatch center system. So if you're, I hadn't talked to you about this, but if you're, I assume this is not a new topic, so if you're able to respond and just talk generally about the proposal, that would be very helpful.
Sure. From a general perspective, absolutely concur with everything that has been said. This is I also want to talk about some fundamental differences in Montpelier's current and liability, if you will, and some things that are happening in the landscape in terms of technology and who owns what, how that impacts funding. Just spoke with Chief Taylor, Gary Taylor, yesterday of St. Albans Police Department. Chief Taylor presented 2 years ago, I think, to the CVPSA about their model. St. Albans owns the equipment that pushes out the signal to their clients. And Chief Taylor advised me just yesterday that their revenue went from $600,000 to $300,000 this year. They own that equipment. What I absolutely agree, I'm not saying that with or without CVPSA, but one thing that is in Montpelier's best interest, as well as Capital Fire Mutual Aid, and the component of that, which is Capital West. Those are the folks that we're actually contracting with, those towns. That we do absolutely need to move beyond the contract to even more of a partnership. We certainly laid, I think, a very strong foundation in the last 5 years for that partnership. So that is the difference with our current contract and how it's structured. They own the equipment. So in other words, since I've been, as Bill knows, since 2007, I've been incredibly cautious about creating a large business model that I could not always be sure I could maintain, because we're talking about Montpelier employees, Montpelier expenses, just to meet contractual needs. But the relationship with Capital is so strong, I took this leap of faith, because in 2008, or whenever the challenges were occurring between Berry Town and Berry City, I absolutely refused to take on Berry Town, because we just didn't, at that time, we didn't have the infrastructure or capacity. I mean, times have changed. But so is this system needed? Yes. How we get there, it's going to require bonding, and I also think that Bill's example of how we deal with wastewater is a perfect example of infrastructure is purchased collectively and then a long-term contract. Something that's you have to have skin in the game. than the other, and also talking to some of my colleagues in Chittenden County, there's a lot of, right out of the gate, a lot of pitfalls right now with what they're proposing looking at Chittenden County. They're kind of ending up with some similar directions to I think where the CBPSA is now. But I also want to make clear this, from what I see, this is absolutely not going to be cost savings. I think we need to be really clear on that, especially if we do what may or may not, because of 273, for example, we have to become not only a dispatch center, but a one-step, as we've heard in the past, PSAP. We're not going to be able to do that, certainly out of the two locations, and we're not going to be able to do it out of Montpelier, even if we had the third floor, and I would strongly propose, and that would be that standalone facility that's solely dedicated to communications. So that's otherwise right now, and I'm concerned about what Berry City is, as always. What does Berry City want to do? They also have some clients that are part of Capital Fire Mutual Aid, but they have a contract with the Berry City Police Department. So again, where does that all fit in? Because otherwise, we have Montpelier and we have Capital West, and with or without the CBPSA, we are moving in that partnership direction. And Montpelier, for now, even currently is the fiscal agent.
So when I say, so it sounds like you agree that, or maybe you can just say, do you agree that the vulnerability that they described with the competing frequencies is a real one? And if that's the case, then assuming the authority doesn't happen, or if the authority didn't happen, what would be the plan for addressing that within the Montpelier?
Is that assuming that legally, Capital West as a statutorily defined municipality, if you will, there's Capital East and Capital West, that they can bond, and I don't know what that looks like, for example, for an individual town, like Cabot. Let's say Cabot chooses, no, we don't want any part of this. I don't know how that works. And then Montpelier would be in on that bond, Berry City would be on that bond, as well as Berry City's clients. So there are a lot of moving pieces there. But I think an end game is all these communities have to say we have to have skin in the game, because seeing how things are unraveling, using most recently it's happening in St. Albans because of a new stand-up described as a very small independent communication center in Middlebury. For example, that was just one of the things that pulled some of the clients away. So for long-term public safety stability, I want to be really clear that all of us need to try to avoid these contractual relationships. I've also had a conversation with somebody that had a lot of, influence in helping Senator White with drafting of 273. It covers a lot of big issues, and I don't know really what the honest expectations are of this bill. It has to do with from the police training to, suddenly moving from dispatching, throwing in the whole PSAP. And I will tell you the Vermont chiefs are very concerned, and I will be testifying on 273 in various components of it. But it is not in the best interest for right now, public safety, for the state to get away from doing the PSAP aspect of communications. But certainly, and I did have the opportunity back in November to tell the committee the concern about the inequity of how they currently bill and not bill.
So I'm sorry.
Sorry,
Go ahead,
what's
Rosanne.
PSAP?
Sorry, public service answering point. It's your 911 call takers. In other words, if right now in the room, if I call 911, it's most likely going to be answered by a 911 call taker, most likely Williston. They're going to take the initial information. They're going to see that it's a medical call in Montpelier City Hall. They're going to contact our dispatch to get all the real detailed information while the call and give it to the Montpelier Fire Department to get the resources to where it needs to be. So that's what I mean by two-step. A single-step facility would be you still have your dedicated call takers, but they're going to be in the same proximity. So the dispatcher's seeing real time. Boom, like we have this 911 call, or they could even be the same person, depending on how it's trained. And then you get into other things that we don't have in Vermont, such as emergency medical dispatching, which is these are all standards, but you have to have a lot of technology in place and systems. And so we have to think, I think, and I would, where I agree with the board anyway, we have to think big and really strategically on this. But like I said, the landscape is changing radically right now, and the one thing that I am comfortable with is that we have a strong partnership relationship with Capital West.
So if we're moving forward with it, strengthening that relationship with Barry and Capital West to further,
With Capital West. not
just
Barry.
Capital West, not Barry.
Well, I mean, Barry, we'd like to. I mean, we've come a long way because of the authority in terms of our.
So just Capital West is the entity that we have a relationship
Right,
with.
that's who we have the
So if we're going to strengthening that and dealing with the technological problems that exist, and I think you said can't expect any cost savings with this proposal. So what advantage do you see for us in supporting the?
Safety, we need this communication system.
Right, but I think you were saying you're moving that direction anyway. So I'm trying to
Yeah, I mean,
understand what advantage we
so
get
let's say
from
CVPS,
funding
let's say
the.
Berry City, for example.
Let me just make sure so people understand the question. I just want to understand the advantages or disadvantages from continuing to support the Public Safety Authority based on the technological limitations of our existing system that you say you're planning to fix. Understand you have a plan to do that, and I'm just trying to understand for us. I don't know about others, but I'm trying to understand. Does this make sense for us economically or some other basis for us to pursue?
What makes sense is that we have to bond. At some point, that's one, I think, inevitable reality.
But we don't need an authority to bond. I mean, we can
That's
do
correct.
that
That's
ourselves.
a policy conversation on that side, because one scenario could be that City of Montpelier, through partnership, similar using the wastewater treatment center plant as an example, we would partner with Capital West. There's a lot of legal things that have to be make sure that we're absolutely clear on, and then most likely, what is our capacity as fiscal agent? We're the ones to manage that, and using it so that's one example, and then but that's the same radio frequency that Berry City would be utilizing at Berry City's clients. So, but it's something that we're gonna all of us, which is Berry City's clients, all the members of Capital Fire Mutual Aid, which goes even beyond which is even Groton and other communities that neither of us dispatch for. This is a radio communication system that.
And
So if we got this system, even just ourselves, would Berry City or town be potentially benefiting from it?
We would have to be very clear in its build out that it's it shouldn't I think how Berry City will benefit. Berry City will benefit. Absolutely.
Okay, so I guess my follow-up question is, I mean, it seems like simple math to me that if we're going to get the same infrastructure regardless, that spreading that liability out over more towns would work out better economically for us. So, I mean, if Berry City, Berry Town are going to benefit from it, why? I'm sorry. Right. Sorry, I shouldn't lump them in, but then yeah, why? And to have them involved would mean going through the authority at this point. Is that correct?
It's what the authority is proposing as the
Right.
proper vehicle to get there.
So it seems like that. I mean, it seems logical to me that it would overall be cheaper for us
And
to
let
go
me
that
give you an
way.
example. A million. I think we ran the example of like $1.5 million bond, a 20-year amortization with like 4%. It translated into a payment stream of about $100,000 over the 20-year period, spread out. It's either Montpelier does it alone; they have to figure out how we get that $100,000, or you spread it out using the similar type of funding formula. Montpelier's share in that formula was roughly 20. Barry's was roughly 20, and so. That's the current formula. We haven't really even looked at that. That's kind of what we're proposing to do. See, how do we split up that risk liability to get something we all need? And by November, we'll have that answer. If they join us, we'll know more next week. Next week we have our meeting with Capital West, where they've asked us to come in to discuss membership. We'll know more next week. Unfortunately, this meeting's right before that. I wish I had more clarification on that. I was very encouraged by Berry City's response yesterday, so they're still at the table. I'd hate to get down the road 2, 3, 4 years down the road, this thing is dissolved, and we don't have the vehicle to actually do this, and you don't have the momentum to do it. It'd be hard to recreate what we've done over the past couple of years. But I'm obviously a lot vested in this, so you can tell me how.
What happens if
completely
Barry
off
doesn't
base.
approve the Berry City approve the proposed appropriation?
Well, it's a collective vote. It's not an individual city vote.
It's just add.
We add up the votes from Montpelier and the votes from Barry, both pro and against.
One-
and that's
one-
one.
one-
It's like Spalding vote for them, and they understand that. They might not be happy that they've always passed it. We've always both passed it by significant margins. We've never run up against that. That may be a bigger issue. And
Recently, this council resolved to support exploration of regional public safety with the caveat that that was going to come out of Montpelier Dispatch in terms of our participation there. Is there any update there? That the standards for participation were to be determined by Montpelier Dispatch. Mr. Cummings or someone else has been involved in making that happen, or has decided that that's not in the interest of the city, or has that proceeded at all?
Professor Cummings, he's a supervisor, overseeing our communications, which we're doing, so I'm not really clear on your question.
Sure. Let me try to state it another way.
I think I know what you're getting at. I think we do intend, as the authority, to help create policies and protocols, and using Montpelier as a model is what we were proposing, and I don't think that has changed. We haven't got that's I think a part of the process over the next 6 months.
If I can just
Please
add, I think along with that, this past year, we've been adding Active 911 as an additional way to using technology to accurately communicate location of fire calls, things like that. We just had at the local emergency planning committee meeting last night in the hospital. We did an after-action review of exercising the Montpelier Police Department's continuity of operations plan, and part of that, it's now to I was informed almost potentially 8 to 11 fire departments are now have Active 911. So as far as the regional, the energy as far as working collaboratively is definitely there, and that was also Berry City. As a matter of fact, that was Deputy Chief Joe Altsworth that gave me that figure, because I thought it was only 5 departments that used it. So in terms of our department, always looking to improve, even with what we do have for technology, and also even something as simple as my big push now that I put up to try to get out to all the fire chiefs is to have them, all of our client communities, to sign up for Vermont Alert, and be like 3 or 4 tier deep, things like that. So again, if we had a message out that we had to evacuate our police department, or we lost our site and we had to relocate to Berry City, we can get that messaging out. So does that help answer what we are doing?
I have no doubts that Montpelier Police Department is constantly improving and looking for ways to improve service. I guess my question was more focused on the role of the Central Vermont Public Safety Authority as it connects to the Montpelier Police Department. And that, for me, has been a concern over the last couple of years. Is how do we get everybody to the table? And how do we get this to move forward?
It's been a concern of mine, obviously, and it's been some things have been frustrating, some things have been great opportunities. As I can reflect back, is that we are even if nothing happened and this were to fail, and you've heard me say it before, we are so much further along because of the work that's been done by the CVPSA in terms of the bridge, for example, the interoperability that we're trying to establish between Berry City and here. And back to the meeting that Tom talked about, as far as that part where I walked out of a meeting excited about something, that was it, because it was clear. We're nervous because there's a lot of things at stake here. I certainly don't want to be in the situation of a community that suddenly has to lay off employees and is sitting on infrastructure they can't use, or being in a community where public safety is at risk because we don't have absolute vital things that a community can afford. And that's kind of where we are now with this infrastructure. And that's where, you know, and you nailed it, and you said, this is why you look at regionalization, because nobody can do this alone.
Do you support this proposal?
I have reservations still, but as far as the infrastructure part of it, I absolutely I would support that. I am concerned about.
Well, I guess
some
what
of
I'm
the
talking
things-
about is the proposed budget, essentially the budget request, and then the related planning that goes into that budget request with an outcome of what they
There's
proposed.
a lot of, you know, if you didn't have any history and you read the proposal that you all received, there's a lot of, you know, really good things in there. I just don't know about some of the deliverables, quite frankly. I mean, you know, I don't, my barometer in terms of 273, you're not, in my conversations with the commissioner, I don't see a lot of that necessarily happening, at least certainly out of this session. And I don't know what Capital West wants to do, except I do know that they want to do it with us. So I think there's still some discussion. So whether or not, I mean, the budget, that budget amount, I'm going to leave that one up to you. We're still working with Capital West. We still, like I said earlier on, we still know we need a partnership. But I'm only looking at it, that's very nearsighted. That's just Montpelier and Capital West. I'm still trying to get my head around the whole thing would look like, and down the road, I do think we're all going to need one location, and that's going to be very pricey, and we all need to be in that together.
I just wanted to follow up on the budget comments, which is just that I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the city manager has not recommended these funds as part of the budget process. Now, certainly this council can add whatever we like to the budget, but I would assume that that recommendation was developed within the budget congress that city staff participated in.
Well, yes and no. We only received the budget request, specific budget request, after our budget was submitted. And so based on the last time the board was here, they told us in the meeting that there would not be a budget request. So that's what we received. Now, I did meet with the board in late December, and it became clear that they might have something coming, but we didn't have it. So I think as soon as we received it, I passed it along and flagged it on January 3rd to you that we now have a new request for 28-2, and you asked to have them in this week, so that was last week. So that's why they're here. I'll just say, so that everyone knows, when I met with the board, I told them at that time that we had zero in the budget, and that it seemed to me that I couldn't predict what the Montpelier Council would do, but that I believed they had to have very clear deliverables, that people were getting tired of spending money without seeing results, that based on our conversations with our staff, Bob and Tony and with Bob and Donna, that the infrastructure was the thing that could benefit the city and the region the most, because it would get, even whether we ever became a regional service or not, it still would allow everybody to communicate together. That we, again, synthesizing what I believe to be the case and being clear that I was speaking kind of for myself, that the city initially went into this with the idea that it was going to be 4 communities, and it ended up only being 2, and that having broader membership would be an important goal, whether it was Capital Fire, whether they could get Barry Town back in, or Berlin, or somebody, that more participation would be a better thing. And that, speaking strictly for myself, that our view on the regional dispatch was, we like the idea, but we already run a very large regional dispatch system, and it runs pretty well. So until we see something that is an improvement financially or service-wise or both over what we're doing, we didn't see a reason to get successful. So what I would say is that, it's my first time hearing this, but the request, at least, I think, is consistent with the message I gave them in December.
Gee.
Couple of questions.
But I don't know about the 28-2, where that comes from or what that means. I just
Wondering whether we have some sort of steady state plan for public safety infrastructure outlined already in our
So we have
Thinking.
funding for facilities and we have funding for equipment in our plans. They're not specifically outlined, but there are some fairly large facilities funds. This would be something we'd have to overlay into that and work that into. But it is, again, as Tony said, a lot of the work that this group has done has been very helpful, and it's helped crystallize the things we've just lived with, that we're living with, and understanding better the problems and the potential solutions as technology changes. I think, whether there's ever a regional system or not, if we somehow had a technological platform that Barry City, Barry Town, Berlin, everybody was on, public safety is going to improve in Central Vermont. I'm not all the way sold that we're ready to merge systems just yet. I mean, operating systems, but and the question is, do we need an authority to explore that or not? And I don't know the answer to that.
Another question, maybe Tom, for you. I think I'm hearing that you met with Barry City yesterday or recently, and last night you said they expressed interest.
They didn't shoot us down.
They didn't shoot you down. Right. So.
And they, we had told them, and I apologize. The issue of not adding any funds in the budget, and I explained it exactly as I tried to do now. It's like I don't want to come back to you in November after we've made progress. We have a bond proposal. We have a simulcast system presentation we made, and we wouldn't be able to see it through to the end of this year. Even if Montpelier takes over at that point, I just wanted to be able upfront that we have funds through late October, November, based on our modeling. And so to get us through similar level of funding so you had to go in a fiscal year to the next July, we'll need these amount of funds. And that's where we took the $100,000 from last year and we backed out the 40 grand. We figured we split the 60. It wasn't anymore. That's how we came up with the Montpelier number.
Well, my question really has to do with I understand about Capital West, and then we have Montpelier. So at the moment, it sounds as though we have 3 potential partners, all firmly planted in midair. And so I'm sitting here wondering, and I actually would like you to succeed. I would like to see a regional public safety authority. I think that our area can support it and would benefit from it. So that's my inclination. At the same time, are we waiting for the first commitment? What is the timeline of commitments, and are we all waiting for somebody else to commit first, or how do municipalities and Capital West make their commitment? How does this happen?
Well, we have a meeting next week with their board, our board and their board, to discuss terms, basically, of what they would feel are acceptable or not. And so we'll know more after next week, or maybe their subsequent follow-up meetings if there's further questions. So it's going to happen, I think, relatively quickly. It's going to be a no or no-go on their part, whether they just want to be a contracted member or not. I would have hoped to have that meeting earlier, but just timeline, couldn't get everyone to the same table. I think from there, I believe dominoes will fall, because as you prove success or as you build up a system, I think you'll prove the value and possibly you'll bring other towns in. But I don't think we have the capacity to bring other towns in until we've set this up.
So will they wait to hear that Montpelier is supportive, or?
I'll give you a comment from December.
How does that work?
From December, when we had our joint meeting, a comment that was made to us, which was frustrating in a way, because they said, well, we would have been forced to join if Montpelier had ceded authority. So our original request, remember, was to cede authority. And it was frustrating to me at that point, because we pulled back that, because I felt that if you had that type of event, it would force sort of the dominoes to fall, so people would view that this is the entity that they have to go towards. So when I heard that comment, I'm like, well, maybe a year ago, if I had phrased it a little bit differently. I think everyone's right there. I think it's a matter of building trust. I think it's a matter of building partnerships, having these public discussions, both with councils as well as dispatchers, to get their opinion on what the true system needs to be developed. I know Caroline's here, and she's been instrumental in helping us at our board level to bring in the dispatcher perspective and to see, well, what do they need? And I think that's going to be tremendously valuable. I think everyone wants the same thing. It's hard to break down everyone's individual barriers And everyone, I think it just needs to be equitable and definable and explainable, and then we can make the roadshow amongst the different towns.
But I think what Jean's also asking, would it help Capital Fire Mutual Aid to have Montpelier say, yes, we
Oh,
support
yes,
this?
yes, it would be tremendously
Is
helpful.
that what you were asking?
Yes.
Yes, it would be tremendously helpful, because we're going into a meeting next week, and I think a vote of support or not would steer them in what direction I think they would feel comfortable committing to or not. You know, a lukewarm non-committal versus a wholehearted support would be viewed differently, I think, in their deliberative process.
And might that also impact Barry's decision as well, or are they waiting for Capital West, or?
Every city's in, and they're not. They didn't vote us down, and they were supportive of our vote, and they're.
Well, the councils, you got the support for this budget proposal? From
Yeah,
the
we went
majority
last
of the
night.
council?
Yeah.
From last night.
Yeah, they had great feedback. You know, one of the points with one of the council members, and I can, Mike Smith is a former council member from Barrie. You know, they're concerned about the Montpelier representation on the board. So it's this territorial thing that we're trying to overcome, and so they want us to review the charter. And so we're trying to overcome all these barriers, but they were supportive. And
Does that include the support of the mayor?
He did support it. I was pleasantly surprised with Tom's support, and they didn't vote, but it was a consensus decision that they understand what we're doing, they understand the deliverables, they understand the exit strategy.
Other questions?
So I thought I read this in here, but I couldn't find it a second time. You all did add a seat on your board for people from dispatch. Is that true?
No.
Oh, okay.
No,
Maybe I did
no.
not read that.
They've been at our meetings, and,
Okay.
and they've had a tremendous amount of input, but we haven't changed our charter to change any voting membership.
There was some conversation last night about dispatch having representation on the board.
Yeah.
And that's when I went in and said that, originally this was a public safety committee looking at fire, police, dispatch, everything, and through all the roads we've taken, we've narrowed it down to we got to start with one in dispatch, and that was the question that was asked, and certainly if we're going to focus on dispatch, there's no reason why not to have some representation there. Whether we can do it as a board member or not, we'd have to look at the charter and see what, that we certainly want that input, without doubt.
Just as a follow-up on membership, too, as you go to Capital West next week, is it your intention to have some mechanism by which they will have representation on this board should they choose to become a partner?
That's what we hope.
We have the mechanism.
You have
The charter has a mechanism, and we welcome their feedback. Part of the issue you get back to in terms of creating policies and protocols, some of the things we've heard is that we have the policies and protocols. It's getting consistent, people following them in all of the towns in the same manner, and sometimes dispatchers have a difficult time in that. I think having them at a seat at the table can address these concerns very quickly and it'll be a very efficient manner.
Okay.
I would like to address the dispatcher membership question. The membership of a dispatcher, as I recall, was intended to be on our dispatch executive committee. We have acknowledged that we have, over the course of our planning time, not done a sufficient job in embracing the dispatching staff in this planning process. We have heard that loud and clear. We have all intentions of including the dispatchers in the dispatch executive committee. But after our third proposal meeting with less than satisfaction from the Montpelier staff, it became obvious that we are not moving forward with dispatching as it's currently planned. And the message was loud and clear that the only way to move dispatching forward needs to be in a single site facility, which is at one of the cores of this budget process. That is going to involve a reconstituted planning process, and at least I can speak for myself, it has to include dispatchers in order to advance this in any way. working through management and working on my own to develop a planning process has failed. And I need to say, perhaps working by the board and on myself alone, it has failed, perhaps less than management, although I have tried to focus myself through management, and that obviously has not worked.
Thank you.
I'm wondering how we could decide whether we are going to offer support for their plan moving forward, something that they could take with them to their meeting at Capitol West. Does it have to be a motion? Or
Well,
can
if you
we
wanted
just-
to do that, you could make a motion, sure. I
Or
wouldn't
could it-
support it, but that's just one voice. But
Can
you
it be a
certainly
less
can-
formal vote, or should it be a motion?
Well, I think the only way to, well, I guess it's up to you. I think a motion would, or a vote would probably be the most appropriate.
All right, so I move that we support the actions of the Central Vermont Public Safety Authority to move ahead to create a partnership, and at this time, would I also include the funding, or is that a separate question?
That would be the same, I mean, my
We'd have to
I'd
place it on the
included
ballot.
I would include the request, I mean, as long as you're supporting it, you may as well.
And that we would agree to support their request for, is it $28,200?
Is there a second?
A second?
Okay, discussion.
Well, Tom, earlier in this meeting, you gave us an option of either to ask for the money now and give it back later if you don't need it, or to succeed and then ask later. And I guess I'm more in the camp of giving you another 6-8 months to fulfill your mission. We've been working on this, as you all know. I've been working very hard for several years, and hundreds of thousands of dollars later. And I do feel like we are getting closer. There are buds on this tree. Whether they will flower or be pollinated or bear fruit, I think still remains to be seen. I have a great deal of confidence in our city manager's ability to find $28,200 in October from our general fund if that were in fact the case and we were able to bring this back to future councils.
Well, just to clarify, if we support this and it's approved by the voters, it's an additional item appropriated outside of our budget.
But we chose not to go that route as a board, because we didn't want to put a council in that position. So we wanted the voters to hear our plan and leave us with the flexibility that if they come back to it and say, we don't approve it, we write a check. It'll be the easiest 2 checks we write to clear out our checkbook. You guys hold our checkbook anyway, so Todd can probably just transfer it internally.
So I'd just like to articulate why I don't support this. I was a very strong supporter of the regionalization proposal. I strongly supported, as you recall, Tom, when you were on the city council, the creation of the Public Service Authority, the involvement of the city of Montpelier. That was, I don't know how many years ago, and it was 3 years ago, several $100,000 later ago. And the goal of that at the outset was clearly to create more efficient services. It was to, and I know there may be some disagreement about that now, but in hindsight, but at the time, and I very clearly remember this, the goal was to create cost savings by providing more efficient delivery of services, by having greater capacity than we have now. And I appreciate the effort. It just feels to me like we have created this authority, and now it continues to look for a purpose. And so we found this flaw in the dispatch system, and so that becomes the raison d'etre of the Public Safety Authority, as opposed to a broader regionalization with multiple towns that was originally the vision that we thought we were creating. And I feel like now we're chasing a purpose rather than having the purpose drive the authority. And I don't really.
Well, let me answer that.
Let me just finish, and then I'll turn it over to you if you like. This may work. I just think at some point we have to say enough's enough, and we've spent Montpelier well over $100,000. I don't think we're going to recoup that money, and I think that what you're proposing, it sounds to me, is something that we could do internally and do it well. I don't think we need another layer of bureaucracy to accomplish what you've highlighted as a problem, and I'm sure that's a benefit that you all have recognized that, brought attention to a problem, but I suspect, well, Whether it would have come to the attention of the city or not, I assume it would have, but I think it's one that the city, in partnership with these other organizations, could address more efficiently without creating another level of bureaucracy and another level of funding. And I just don't see that we will ever get the returns that we were expected at the outset, at least when I supported this. So that's why I don't support the continued funding that's been proposed.
I appreciate it. I just want to make a couple comments. One, I think public safety is the number one funding priority of any city in Vermont. And that I may differ from people's opinions, but I think it's the core function of any city government. And so because of that, I feel this is vitally important. Two, this issue didn't find us. This came about through discussions with dispatchers, board members, city council members, city managers, police chiefs, fire chiefs, the people who are actually doing the business. So it didn't find us. This is how it's evolved. You know, we've presented different ways we felt we could make a positive impact. This is the latest iteration that we think we have a meaningful chance. Third, we're offering an exit strategy that we know regionalization is difficult. We also know that there needs to be some time commitment and commitment from outside communities, or there's some or it's not going to happen at that time. And we've offered that through this budget process. So I appreciate your, you know, I think regionalization is the answer for a lot of different things. This being, I think, one of the most important. And so with that, thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Ann?
So I just want to express that I really appreciate, Paco, that you know, in moving forward, you would be including you know, voices of dispatchers as a part of the process. That's really important to me. And in addition, I mean, with this bill that may end up increasing the fee for what is otherwise you know, a free service right now, might position this group really well to you know, take up people who are sort of abandoning you know, the what used to be a free service but won't be. So we may be able to pick up some more customers you know, after the session if everything goes really well. So we'll see. I mean, I also feel like this is the what's the right expression? The Fisher cut bait year, and so, you know, I'm willing to, you know, support this, and if it works, great. If not, I mean, we've certainly learned a lot. So.
Anyone else? Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Nay.
The ayes have it. All right.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the time.
Okay, so let's see. We have 3 more items. Budget discussion, workshop on TIF, which we're going to do last, and then an appointment, and then a
Thank you.
discussion of eminent domain
That's all right.
findings.
Thank
So why don't we do the budget discussion next? Oh, yeah, sure. All right, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back. Discussion about the budget before moving to the other items. Bill, did you just want to run through the list of things that you had, and then anybody who has others could add to it?
So last week when we had our budget discussion, there were only a couple items flagged. We tried to get you as much information as we could. One was the Central Vermont Public Safety Authority, and we're just taking a vote on that. There was a question, just I think more informational about the special events costs, and we tried to break that out as best we could and get that to you. Question of whether Airbnb revenue was tracked by community, the answer was no. Question about council pay, and I sent you out some information about that. GMT has sent us some information today. They will be here at our next meeting. So they have, anyway, you guys got their letter. We can talk about that if you'd like. And there was a question about if we wanted to do ordinance review, and what did we decide? Was it 8,000 we thought was?
7,000 to 8,000.
It was probably sufficient to do the bulk of what we'd like to do for this coming year. So those were the the notes I had as pending issues from last week.
Can you give us a top line if we were to do all of those things, what it would add to the rate?
Well, so
About half
so,
a cent.
So, well, if it was 8,000 for the ordinances, depending what you decided on council pay, I can't remember what the options were without looking at my sheet. So with those two items, say that was 12,000 or 13,000, then.
Right. And then adding
we've added the
CVPSA.
CVPSA, so
40.
So that's half a cent. About $87,000 is 1 cent on the tax rate.
And then in percentage terms, we were at about 2% before. We'd be at 2.5?
Yeah, it's
Just shy
the
of
cents
that.
and percents run pretty close. So if we were at 1.9, we were at 2 cents, 1.9%, so we'd be at 2.5 cents, probably 2.4%.
Okay, why don't we take these one at a time? Council pay, did somebody have a proposal they want to make or discussion? Where do you want to go with that?
So, well, Donna, you sent in an email out about this that, speaking for you now.
Go ahead.
Well, your email had said that you were thinking of increasing it to 2,000 for the council and 4,000 for the mayor.
Oh, that one. Okay, yes. I couldn't remember what I said. I did send an email in response to Bill that I thought it was 2,000 to 5 didn't seem as balanced to me as 2,000 to 4. But that was just.
That sounds fine to me.
So in total,
Is
we're
that a
what's the
motion?
I can
So
certainly
the ad
make a
would be
motion.
5,800.
That we'd be raising city council's annual stipend pay to $2,000 and the mayor's to $4,000.
And that would be a $5,800 budget increase.
So you want to make that a motion?
I make, John Odom, did you take that as a motion? I tried to present it as such.
I was prepared for it to be.
Is there a motion? How about that?
Yeah.
I would like to make the motion that we increase city council's pay up to $2,000 and the city mayor to $4,000.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Is there a discussion? Justin?
Well, this council just a few minutes ago decided to spend over $28,000 in additional money outside the city manager's recommendation to contain the tax rate to around that of inflation. This is particularly important to me because, as many of you know, a significant portion of the residents in Montpelier are seniors living on fixed incomes. Well, that has gone up a little bit this year. The Medicaid reimbursement has gone down, effectively eating up much of that increase. And so as we weigh increasing the burden of taxation on our residents, I think giving ourselves a pay raise may be something to consider, and I can certainly appreciate the equity issues, but I can't support it at this point because we've already gone over what I thought we had agreed as a target, and I understand that's certainly the privilege. So one of the main things this council and all councils do is spend other people's money, but to do it to give myself a raise, I can't support.
Any other comments?
I would just observe that you're not giving yourself specifically a raise.
Thank you.
I appreciate Justin's comments, but I do think that there is a matter of equity in terms of who gets to participate in the decision-making process. And in the short term, by shortchanging, not shortchanging, but by underpaying the council in order to save the taxpayers' money, which is my initial impulse, but by doing that over a long period of time, we've decreased the value that we put in serving on city council and decrease the ability of lower income residents to participate. And folks really do have to decide, you know, can I afford to spend an extra 5-10 hours a week on this? And I will say that I spend a lot of time reading. I spend a lot of time at both these meetings and at our subcommittee meetings, and I don't think that's an overestimate of how much time it takes. And in order for somebody to make that commitment and really be here and be present and be able to make that decision those really important decisions, they need to have the financial ability to do that. And I don't know that we can fix that just by going up $800, but I think that we can try and move in that direction to make it more possible for folks of more diverse economic backgrounds to serve on the council.
Any further discussion?
Just ask a clarifying question. I should have asked this too, because I should have asked the same question about the CVPSA motion, and I didn't. This motion is addressing the wording that you will then put on the ballot, right? Because it's worded as though you're assessing that money now, and the CVPSA kind of was too. It didn't reference the ballot or anything. So I mean, I can make that inference and make some adjustments, but I just wanted to be sure.
Well, and we'll be approving the ballot at the next meeting anyway, so they'll have their chance to do that. But the CVPSA charter actually calls for it to be ballot items, so the council can't technically.
You don't do that wording. We'll send you the wording.
And
No, I just mean in terms of the wording of the two motions that were made.
Right.
I'm like,
if
wanted to make sure.
The council pay is on the ballot as separate items.
Right.
We've always accounted for that amount of money in the budget as well. So we would put it in as though it had passed.
Okay.
I don't know what happens if I assume if they don't pass it at zero. But
Well, I won't worry about the wording then, as long as it's clear and it's consistent. I'll just put it as is. Keep my hands off. Just checking.
But on the ballot, it says approve this much amount for councilors and this much amount for the mayor, and that's the amount I was stating, what I would expect to see on the ballot.
Well, right, just that the motion was simply move to pay $2,000 for councilors and
Right.
mayor to $4,000.
Right.
Period. So that's why I was checking.
And so once the pay went up, I'm assuming they would then be put on the ballot that way.
Or you would put it on the right. You'd put it on the ballot if it passed, then
Yes,
that's what it
if
would be.
passed.
But
Okay.
we would put it in our budget to assuming that it was going to pass, so we'd accounted for it in projected tax rates. We usually show people the effective ballot items on.
I think, and again, I'm just going to come back to this. I feel like this is something that people should vote on, and I don't think that this is the council saying we're taking a pay raise from anybody. I mean, this is us saying, and I think Rosie's point is poignant, because as someone who has not necessarily been in a financial position to always have the option of doing something like this, which is probably one of the most important things that I do with my time. I mean, time translates to money for a lot of people in our community, and I think that it's important that we're cognizant of that all of us right now are in a position where we can give up that time from other things that generate a livelihood for us to be here. And I think it's important that our constituents hear this conversation, and I think that it's important that they, that they have the ability to vote on that. And if they say no, that's fine. I still have frankly, the luxury of being able to show up because I'm in a place in my life where I can, but I also want to know, I want my community to know that I support everyone having the option of standing up and saying, yeah, I want to serve my community, and now I feel like I'm in a place where I can because I'm going to have enough to pay, for someone to come in and sort of pick up the slack where I can't right now because I am serving in such an important role in my city.
I'd just like to express my gratitude for the training line items and also the copying line items that historically have been part of the City Council's budget. I know that budget is proposed to shrink significantly, but I hope that future councils see fit to leave those in place. For me, making those copies was an expense that I really appreciated the city bearing the burden of, and that those other supporting line items within the City Council's budget besides just compensation, that to me were very valuable as well.
Anyone else? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, GMTA. Received a memo today. I just want to make note of the frustration that I had about this process was that and Bill and I have talked about this back in November, was concerned about having seen the ridership numbers that this really was not a viable, that it didn't look to me to be, it raised a lot of concerns about whether this was an appropriate place for us to put our money. So we asked for certain information about ridership, cost per riders, then wanted to meet with them, just hadn't gotten anything, and then we see that we're scheduled to meet with them in the night we approve our budget. So I felt like we were being put in a box. So Bill and I have talked about that. The result was we did get a response from them, a memo, and I think they are taking those concerns to heart. Maybe they were pursuing them anyway. But we do have a proposal here. It sounds like they're going to propose a reworking of this route in response to the ridership. And I just want to say I'm very supportive of this of GMTA. I just don't want us to put money where it's not effective. I want us to put it for spend money on mass transit. I want it to be used in a way that's promoting mass transit. And it looks like they're responding to that, so I'm satisfied with my concerns. Rosie.
Well, do you have a sense? Are they asking for $40,000, or do we put that in there as a placeholder?
Well, that's what it has been. I don't want to speak for their agency. I would not be surprised if they came in with a revision, if they rework this, particularly if they do it with the capital shuttle, because that's funded by the state. I think one option might be they come in and ask for less money with a reworked route. They will be here at the next meeting.
Okay.
They're aware, they were here, actually physically here the night we finished the zoning, and after 2 or 3 hours, we finally decided to let them go. And I think they were planning to talk about that, and we had hoped to have them last week. Couldn't make it. Hope to have them tonight. They can't, but they are here. So it's unfortunate, the timing, but I've had a couple conversations with Mark Souza, their general manager, and I think they get it, and they don't want to support low performing routes either. So the 40,000 was based on prior appropriation, so that's what.
So we'll know more on the
We'll know
24th
more
about
on
whether
the
that's the actual number they're asking for. In general, I just want to say that I've been following along on their next-gen planning process, and I'm really impressed by how in-depth they've gone, and they're really, all the routes, they've really been trying to figure out how to make this work better, and I really appreciate that process that they're going through. So I think I look forward to hearing more from them, but it's an interesting process.
I'm curious, in those discussions, are they considering autonomous vehicles much in that plan? As many of you know, this week was the Las Vegas Consumer Electronics Show, and several major motor manufacturers have unveiled autonomous vehicles, so there are some significant players working on solving this challenge sooner rather than later. And I am, for one, I'm very interested in starting to set some amount of money aside in anticipation of the reality that this technology will be coming forward perhaps sooner than we expected. If we have, I'll just speak anecdotally, many times when I see these rather large, heavy fuel-consuming vehicles traveling our streets, they're not full. And I know that they provide capabilities for disabled or other people that perhaps a smaller vehicle may not. But in the suite of options that we may explore to get people from A to B, I certainly hope that autonomous vehicles are one of the things that we're thinking about and considering in the not-too-distant future.
I can just say, from having read their materials, I didn't see anything on that, but I did see that they were looking at shifting some of their ADA and medical rides more to a demand response, like individual vehicles, rather than relying on the buses for those. I think that was part of observing that. Can't speak for them, but having read the publicly available materials.
That makes a lot of sense. If you've got, often one rider, I think their numbers show virtually one rider on a bus at a time. It's going to be a lot cheaper to sort of a smaller vehicle and do it at a,
And better
basis.
service for that
and a
person.
lot more convenient to the users. Ashley.
I would just like to highlight that, I don't have to rely on public transportation living in Vermont, but I've lived in other areas where that was my option, and I think for a lot of folks that's the only option, and I would hate to think that as a council we were willing to send a message that we are not invested in making sure that everyone has access to employment, to medical care, to grocery shopping. I mean, some of these are basic necessities that these services provide, and while I realize that maybe the numbers aren't what we would want to see or what we had hoped to see, that this is a significant function that city government performs in providing access to life-saving services to people. And I think as a council member, it's incumbent upon me to point out that while we might not need to rely on that, there are folks who live in our districts that do. And I think that we need to send a clear commitment to ensuring that those folks still have access to reliable, safe transportation that gets them to their necessary and sometimes even fun appointments. And I think that that's a part of what we perform as a function as a council.
Because it's a good point, because the circulator is not a density like your commuter bus going by or even the Capital Shuttle. It's for those, it is a demand response. So you have a base route, but you go off the route. And it is for people who don't have other options for whatever reason. And we made that commitment, I think, to our citizens who don't have access to our roads any other way. And we've even made it no fee to encourage that. So to feel that we're now paying at $40,000 is just 20% match of the federal and state money that supports that route. It doesn't cover that route. And at that rate, with just even 18,000 people, that's $2.22 a ride that we supplement. It's so small. We do much more than that on the road to every car driver. So I really hope we keep a balanced picture. People never quite understand what the car costs them because it's there, you pay your insurance, you pay your gas, and you drive. So when you translate that to a bus, I think we sometimes forget. That's all. Just keep an open mind.
I would just say, I mean,
Keep an
with
open
the
mind.
cost, and I totally agree with you about both the need to support low-income individuals who need transportation options, but also public transit generally. But I think we have to do it in a cost-effective way. I mean, if you're talking about $10 a ride, no one of us would even.
$10 a ride.
Well, it is the gross on the memo. It said the gross cost for boarding $10.79. Now that's not our cost, but I don't think we can just
Yeah, I
look
guess I didn't
solely
see
at
that.
our
It is on the
cost. That's the subsidized cost is $2.19.
Oh, for a demand
Um,
route, that's cheap.
So, $10 a rider. I mean, that just none of us would ever consider spending $10 to get in the car and drive somewhere. I mean, that's just a very high. The point I'm making, I think they're getting it, is we need to be cost effective in how we deliver services. That's all I'm asking. We can't just. We've spent $40,000 a year. Let's just continue to do it regardless of whether people use it, and people don't, and that's the unfortunate problem. People don't use this service on any kind of significant basis.
It's 70 rides a day. What's going to happen to those rides, John?
Well, I think that's what GMT's working on. I think we're going to hear what their proposal is.
Just to be clear on my position, I was not suggesting that we cut funding this year. I was trying to draw attention to the fact that there are new options available. Now, there is no autonomous car today. I've used the bus to get to medical appointments myself. I can certainly appreciate how helpful that was. I'm encouraging us to think beyond what we have today because we look at this every year and we put money towards it because it is a worthy cause. My point is, how can we get those people where they want to go better?
And
So I'm also very excited about autonomous vehicles. That'll be a great day. Separate from that, though, just in thinking about how to creatively consider, getting ridership up, there's going to be a working group of people from the school and I believe also GMTA to talk about, because right now there's not buses that go to the high school or to the middle school, and so thinking about how we can use that service, specifically for kids, or potentially design some of the routes so that they're convenient for kids to take. I think will be very exciting. So I'm a part of that group, and if anyone else would like to join us.
I'm wondering if the city is talking with these folks about construction plans for next year, and
That's also one of the things we're talking about.
part of what they're working on. Okay, that'll be more riders, probably.
Depends where we can find a place to park them. That's the challenge right now.
Okay, well, this isn't anything we need to take action on. So, is there any other comments? We'll be taking it up again in 2 weeks, I think.
Yeah, they'll be here for the 24th.
Okay, what did we?
The last one was ordinance revisions.
That may have.
That was me. Yeah.
I don't know what that is.
So just thinking about next year's goals, something that we've talked about is that our ordinances could use some overhauling and some aligning with reality, perhaps, and also, incorporating restorative justice practices and enforceability, etc. So we did not pick that up for the goals for this year. So in thinking about that, we may want to do that for next year. We may want to anticipate putting to the budget sufficient amount of legal fees to support that work, because that's going to be where potentially a lot of the lift will need to happen legally.
What are the goals? What are the things you're hoping to see?
Well, so this is an idea that a lot of our ordinances say things that we don't actually enforce. And they're, we've heard from a number of different folks within staff, and then, all of us have noticed things as well where our practice isn't quite in line with what our rules say. And so I would like, and I think Ann would like, and others were agreeable to next year, perhaps instead of having, a whole bunch of projects that we want to focus on, that our big overarching goal for next year, contingent on the new members who join us, of course, would be that we would do an in-depth look at all those ordinances and all those policies and make sure that we kind of narrow it down to what we actually want to to prohibit and allow and encourage, and that our policies say what we do. So that was the idea. And that if we're going to do that, we probably need to have a little funding to support that process.
I'm curious, roughly how many ordinances do we have currently?
No, it's a big fat book.
Thousands, tens of thousands?
Oh, not tens of thousands, no, probably hundreds.
Hundreds.
And I assume that part of that budget line is for a lawyer to review. So this is like a perennial complaint of mine as a resident here in Montpelier. I'm really curious, and this is, I realize, maybe not the best time, but, and I have asked about this before just to community members, I'm really curious about how much we spend on legal fees and whether or not that is something that we need to look at bringing in-house. I know we're a small city, but we seem to rely a lot on retained counsel for opinions, and that is not cheap. I'm a lawyer. I know how much I don't make in civil service and how much the private sector does. And I think it's a very important function, and I just, I struggle sometimes with the notion that, we get these long memos back because I know how many hours those take. I mean, I've done that research, and I have, written those memos, and I want to sort of keep that on people's minds, if we're gonna do all this work, which I think is really important work, the legal costs associated with that, it might make sense to start thinking about bringing that in-house seriously.
Just on that point, do you have those budget numbers available, or maybe you can get them to us, like what we?
I have it.
I'd be interested year to date what we spent
I
on
have it
attorneys,
from
and then
this
what we
book.
budgeted. Or I'm sorry,
I think year to date. Don't hold me to this, but I the last I glanced at it, we were in like the $12,000 range. So this year has not been a big.
That seems like incredibly low.
Yeah, our budget for the year has been between 40 and 55 between last year and this year.
Way more than that historically.
Proposed for next
in prior
year is
years, because of
42,000.
personnel issues and other contentious issues, we were well over 100,000.
Adopted for 2018 was 55,000.
Yep.
So
And that's general fund. We also have some in the water and sewer funds.
Correct, for Berlin. Yeah, it's not a huge number. We're tracking well.
That's great. Okay,
Yeah.
that's good.
Let's keep up the good behavior.
And our thought with this is that some of this work will be done with an intern, and then in-house, and then we would send it just for review, not have a lawyer
Yes,
drafting
yes.
everything that's.
It just strikes me that to me, that's a function of city government, and rather than paying a private attorney who's billing at whatever their rate is, it's usually over a couple $100. I mean, it just seems like something we as a city should really look at and sort of see, what the going rate would be to bring it in-house, what a salary would look like. And I know it would be adding a city employee position, which there is certainly a cost associated with, but it just strikes me that it's something that if that's what we as a city are spending on legal advice, maybe it is something that we need to really think about bringing back to the city.
One of the struggles that we've had with legal opinions is the level of expertise within any one office or within any one attorney. And I think, at least in my time here, we've gone to a number of different folks. So I don't know if there's one person or even one office that could fulfill the variety of questions.
Great thing about lawyers is they have networks.
Well, I mean, and that's certainly a conversation we could have. I don't know if we're going to solve that one tonight.
No,
but
and I'm not
over the next
saying
year.
that it
No,
needs to be solved now, but I feel pretty strongly that if we're relying on lawyers' opinions for things, which we should be, that's prudent to do, and we're spending, if we've budgeted $55,000, not saying that would be enough to compensate a city attorney's salary, but I think it's an important question to ask.
Rosie, just
I just want to add that I would really be interested in seeing those numbers, so Bill.
I think it's a great point you're making historically, financially. I think it's a very strong case to be made in terms of historically
Double entendre there.
we exceed the 40 or 50 or the small increases that we put into our legal budgets. I'm glad to see there's a correction this year, whether it's long-term or not, I have no idea. I certainly, even in this budget cycle, if we're currently allocating $42,000 for legal fees, I would have no problem earmarking $8,000 or whatever the number was, 42 less 8, with the intention of exploring ordinance. Seems to make sense that if it could be saved in lawsuits, then we could use it somewhere else. We have it carrying over a balance, significant balance from this year.
All right, so the question is whether there's support for adding, maybe you want to make a motion to add this funding into an additional.
Well, I guess I want to ask then, Bill, do you think that this is something that we could just use the fund balance left over from this year's savings to do, rather than having to add it
It's possible.
to the budget?
Yeah,
for
it's
next
not.
year?
It's not a huge amount, and if it's becomes a council priority, we'd make it work. As I said, our thought was a lot of the sort of grunt work, so to speak, we'd hire an intern over the summer and do that at a lower rate of pay, and then only have the final results reviewed. And actually, we planned it out, having the League of Cities and Towns do it, and their hourly rate is a lot cheaper than most of the private practice. It's more like $92 an hour. It's still not cheap, but it's cheaper than a private firm. So,
I think there is a tremendous amount of work that can be handled in-house. Just silly things like fee
We all
reference, specific
ourselves wanna
fees
look
that
at
may be in
it.
some.
It makes sense.
Yeah, so I think once staff takes a first crack at actually updating everything, and then by the time legal looked at it, we'd have a pretty solid document.
Well, and I should add that it's really my intention personally for me personally, this is my priority for next year, and I don't intend to be making lots of other asks of staff. So I'm hopeful that might
Sounds
generate
like
some.
you're chairing the committee.
You all set with this one?
So, is your thought then to just take the leftover, which is going to effectively be reserve money for next
Or
year?
you take it out of current, the budgeted legal funds and.
If you're comfortable with doing that, Bill, I guess I would.
That's fine with me. I just wanted to raise it as a upcoming issue. So.
Okay, any others on our budget list? All right, terrific. I think we should say two items before we.
And just as a wrap up, you've added 34,000 tonight between the council pay and the 28,000. Conceivably, if the GMT gets reduced next week, that net could drop.
I wouldn't expect that.
Well, I don't know what they're going to
I
propose.
know, but don't. You seem to promise it. I wouldn't expect it.
I just said conceivably.
Well, it's based on he's not making this up out of
Well,
thin
I
air.
talked to him too. I just wouldn't. It's great if it happens. So
We'll hear what we hear, I guess.
Where are we?
Okay,
Just
yep.
at 34,000. Where are we at? Or I guess you can send it to us after.
Yeah.
Calculate it out
Okay.
for
Or
you.
we can crunch it out while we're having the next conversation.
Okay, next item is to make an appointment to the ADA Advisory Committee.
We appoint Tina Wood to the ADA Advisory Committee.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
thank her.
If you're watching Tina Wood, thank you for your service on that. Sounds like you're eminently qualified for that, and we appreciate that. It's an important committee. Next item is to approve the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and order regarding eminent domain of the Cummings Street property. So the council had a site visit on December 6, 2017 of a property on Cummings Street. It's necessary. The city had proposed a necessity of a taking of a small amount of property to allow for a bridge replacement on that road, which provides access to the Cummings Street apartments. The city had a site visit, then held a hearing that night. We met in the executive session a week ago and reached a tentative agreement at that time on a proposed order. I've circulated that order. Didn't hear back of any changes beyond what I tracked based on the conversation we had last week. So with that, do we have a motion to approve this proposed order?
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor, please say, I'm sorry. Is there discussion? I think Councilor Turcott wanted to.
I do have something to say, which anytime that a body considers seizing personal property, I think this is a very, very important matter. Our founding fathers knew this in the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, if I may, Mr. Mayor, read very briefly from that.
Sure, of course.
That the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, and papers and effects against unreasonable search and seizures. I think there was agreement amongst this body that there was a necessity in repairing this bridge. There are a whole bunch of people that live on the other side of it, and the state saw that it was in very ill repair and needed to be replaced. What was less clear was the value of the yard, which included absolute water frontage, mature trees, and someone's lawn. While this council did reach a decision on compensation, my advice to any residents who are faced with imminent seizure of their personal property in the future is that you consult with and retain an attorney to be sure that your interests are well represented.
Thank you, Justin. Are there any other comments? Yes, Ashley.
I'd just like to highlight that it's actually the Fifth Amendment that deals with eminent domain and takings for public purposes. The Fourth Amendment deals generally with constitutional law regarding the issue of warrants for criminal proceedings, but the Fifth Amendment, and I agree with Councilor Turcotte that this is a significant issue, and I think that the council deliberated this in a thoughtful, meaningful way, and I understand that potentially the outcome is not what some may have hoped, but that I think that this project is significant and important to our city.
Is there any other discussion? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Because we're going to do part of our discussion with you folks on TIF in executive session, we're going to wrap up everything else. We'll just take, I think, a couple of minutes. Do council reports. Donna?
Pass. Pass.
Justin?
I just want to thank the residents for their patience in the snow removal over the last couple weeks. The city has many veteran staff that have been through dozens and dozens of winters, but Mother Nature still has a few tricks up her sleeves, but people need not worry. DPW does as well. So, thank you for being patient.
Rosie?
I'll pass.
John and I were both at the rink opening today. It was delightful, as well as Governor Scott. And so go check out the rink on the State House lawn.
Pass.
Okay. So I'm all set.
Do you all want to know what money, since you were talking about money and taxes and ballots, what's circulating?
What do you mean? Oh, in terms
As far
of
as asks?
Yes.
Yeah, petitions.
Yeah, that would be useful to know. As Bill was running through all those, I realized we've got a pretty significant amount hanging out there.
Yeah, I mean, I hesitate to bring it up because I don't want to be a bummer on your all's discussion, but I thought maybe I should mention it. There's the only thing that I know of that's money. There's a one petition going around with 3 asks on it, and just so you all know, they approached me and asked if that was okay. I didn't think it was, but apparently the law says yes, it is. I don't like it at all, just out of principle. I mean, I can imagine this ballot with a bunch of. It seems rife for fraud or manipulation, but it is the law. So the 3 that are out there are Central Vermont Home Health and Hospice is looking for $20,000, Good Samaritan Haven $4,000, and People's Health and Wellness Clinic $2,000. So I haven't heard of any others, so I don't think there are any others. So
Thank you for that. And I guess I would just say, we had this long discussion. I think this is an issue that the next council really needs to address, because what we've done is created this fund that was based on a certain amount, and now we have this significant amount going off ballot, and it's increasing it by 30% beyond what we used to spend. So I think it doesn't really work, and we haven't figured that out. But I hope the next council does figure out some way to sync up these 2 processes, because they don't work together now. Bill.
The only thing I have is meeting start times. I guess suggestion or question would be the next meeting. We've got a fair amount on the last budget hearings and GMT and all that. Suggest 6, but do people want to go back to 6:30 after that? The 2 February meetings.
Yeah. Is the next meeting the 17th or 24th?
24th.
Good.
6th 6:30, it works a lot better for me. It's just hard to.
This is our assumption. We
wrap
moved it up to
everything
6 because of zoning, and then we kind of rolled it into budget, but it seems like.
I would like that.
6:30?
Starting
Works for me, yeah.
That's fine.
Starting in February.
Starting
Okay, that was it. That's all I had.
6:30 starts in February 24th?
Not next week.
Oh,
Not next
okay.
week. 2 weeks.
Okay.
I keep saying next week, but I don't mean
I'm sorry.
However, next week, the sprinkler committee is meeting at 4:30 on the 17th.
That's true. Good heavens.
We're making good use of our
Is
Wednesday.
that it? You're all set? Okay. Okay, so we'll move to the workshop on the TIF program.
So while they're setting up, I just to provide guidance about where we're going, understand, and because some of this involves some private properties, you'll be asked, we'll do a public portion, and then at some point we'll need to do some of it in executive session, and I don't think, obviously we choose for us to continue phase 2 of the grant, we'll do that in public session, but, or we can do that at the next meeting, whichever you prefer. That's it, and these three are going to lead us through that. I think there is a presentation piece.
Does anyone ever bring their jammies to
Welcome,
these
both
meetings?
of you. Oh, man, this is early. We're just getting started.
Okay, I'm awake.
This is early,
Yeah, you guys deserve a raise. So, we will have a PowerPoint up shortly for you, but just to start out, we are from White and Burke, Scale Henderson King, and I'm Stephanie Healy. You guys saw us back in July, I believe, approving the first phase of the work we were going to do for you on the TIF district. So tonight we're going to, if I can just pull this up, we'll walk you through several the kind of big picture findings of phase 1. We started in phase 1 of our work, and then we're prepared to talk about phase 2, and the goal is to move forward to phase 2. Whether that happens at tonight's meeting or in 2 weeks. We have a slot, I think, reserved in 2 weeks in case we don't get through it all. If you want more time to digest or ask questions and we need to come back and answer them, we've built that time into the timeline a little bit. So I guess, again, I want to emphasize, and the materials were pretty thorough. Sorry, they were long. I heard you say, like, taking 10 hours to read them. I'm like, I hope they weren't all on ours. I'm sorry. But to give you enough, I mean, we haven't seen you in 6 months, and we wanted to give you a thorough update on everything we've been working on. And so what I want to emphasize is that tonight's discussion is really not about, and even the next step, which is going to phase 2, is not about any major projects. It's not about making any decisions for any particular project, private infrastructure, or approving any public infrastructure, or approving any private project. It's really process oriented. This is moving the ball down the field in the process of establishing a TIF district. So tonight we're going to go through a quick recap of what is TIF, because sometimes it gets stale, it's nuanced, it's worth just reiterating. Oh, good. Seriously, jammy time. All right. So I'm speaking, so I'll just be watching you. Just keep awake. And then we'll talk about what we did, what phase 1 included, what our purpose was to find viability. What did we look for in order to determine whether or not there is viability here for a district? What were our findings? And then some of the questions that we see and we've seen in other districts that the council and the legislative body needs to answer for themselves in order to move on to the next step. And then what is phase 2 and next critical steps? Now, a lot of these, as the manager said, we have to go into executive session. There's some nuances. There's some things about the findings that we learned that were confidential, and also things that we determined that could potentially impact your position negotiating going forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gail to walk you through one more time, just a quick refresh on what is TIF.
Thank you, Stephanie. So development challenges often in downtowns can affect the viability of projects, brownfields, infrastructure, are just an example of those. And TIF is a tool that can be used to help address that challenge and be able to make projects move forward a little easier. So what is TIF? It is a financing tool that I'm sorry, a little light. I'm a little. So it's a financing tool that's used to help spur public projects by building public infrastructure to help spur private development in an area that the city has determined, or a municipality has determined, needs improvement. And one of the way a TIF district works, and it's kind of a little bit in this diagram, is that you start off determining what is the existing value of a property. So, for example, an existing property may be worth $1 million today. After redevelopment, that site then would be worth $5 million. So the difference between those two, the $4 million, is the increment of growth that's happened on that property. And then for the purposes of TIF, the taxes from that $4 million is what the revenue from that is what's used to help fund projects, for the public infrastructure projects. Yes. So a municipality designates a TIF district, and it can be, inclusive of ideally of potential projects. Sometimes they're more real than others. Others may be more speculative, and oftentimes that district will be defined or include a designated downtown, a growth center, or some other area with it, including that area. This is Hartford's TIF district area plan. And so what happens, this is a little bit of how TIF works, and I'll just make this fairly quick and simple, but when the TIF district is created, the original taxable value of all the properties in the district is set. So that's what all the properties currently pay for taxes. So that any improvements that happen, the increment difference of what the value of the property is today to what the value of the property will be afterwards is what is the funds that I'm sorry.
The debt service. Yeah.
The debt service will be used to pay off the debt service. So TIF can use both the municipal a portion of the municipal taxes, but the reason a TIF district is created is because you're going to be retaining part of the state taxes that go to state education. So legislation allows up to 70% of the state taxes to be withheld and used within the TIF district. So that's what happens for 20 years within a district, and then at the end of 20 years, that the total taxes then will be going to both the municipality and the state as they would have before the district was created. So you're increasing your grand list and improving your designated area within your TIF district as a result of TIF.
And interestingly, I was actually just at legislature yesterday testifying to the Senate committee about TIF. They wanted to know more and kind of an update since they passed the new legislation last year. And in researching that, I found a statistic from St. Albans that for the 5 years before they approved their TIF district, there was $20 million of growth in their grand list. Since that creation of the district, there's been 5 years since, 65 million growth in their grand list. So, by a factor of 3. So that's where, at the end, hopefully, of 20 years, it'll grow even further. And now you've grown your grand list by that much. So that's the hope. So we embarked on phase one. Really, it was to determine if Montpelier had viability. Does it have enough projects to and need and demand to be able to? Is it a good tool for the city? Would it pass the VEPC standards for the statutory requirements? We started with just gathering all the data you have so far. Tons of good studies, lots of information, a lot of data already gathered. Then worked with the local folks, city management, as well as regional development to talk about, what properties are coming to the forefront and what are their needs, what are their demands, infrastructure demands. And then did some initial number crunching, met with property owners. And what we're really looking for in the viability is to start with what is that infrastructure demand and what would be the project viability after the private project is done. Does it fit within statutory criteria? Is there sufficient increment? Is there enough that it would net positive? Our point is to look for net positive at the end of 20 years. Can you pay off the debt service with those incremental taxes? And then cash flow is another piece of it, though, because you may be able to net positive, but are you able to cover those early years of debt service, which we'll talk about more in depth in our executive session because I gave you more notes than you needed on that. So our findings are that this is a viable community for a TIF district. What that district looks like is to be determined. There are a lot of factors. There are a lot of potential projects that could happen. Again, this is all subject to change. That's what phase 2 is for, is to actually develop the plan. But by looking at the range of potential projects, we were able to run a bunch of numbers. We were able to make some assumptions and plug that in and see that there are a few different ways this could be set up that it could work. So some of the potential projects, we did not list all because some are still confidential. We can talk about that in executive session. But a few of the potential projects that stand out are ones that have been talked about a lot in this community. So the Capitol Plaza building, the new hotel, but they really can't go forward and do a project without parking. They're just, talk about tight site, and the demand would increase so much. And currently their parking is being used for the public as well. And so there's just a big constraint there. And downtown parking is really expensive. Water and sewer upgrades there as well. And then out on Berry Street, the Vermont College of Fine Arts property has been discussed for a possible housing project, and then Sabins for a possible housing project, which I'm sure this is news to you, but we learned. It was great. And there are Berry Street improvements that would be needed. The water and sewer to be upgraded, the road, the infrastructure, the bridge there, bridge and culverts on that road that have to be upgraded. And those costs really can't be borne by those projects. Those are things that if they could be, they'd be done already. The demand is there, so the market is there demanding it, but at the rate that would be needed to be able to make those numbers work is not there. We're not in a place where you can charge you can only charge so much for retail space, office space, housing. So where we got to with this is that we started digging deeper on at least one of these projects, which is Capitol Plaza. Capitol Plaza you are a fortunate community that you have a project that is teed up and ready. It is a project that really has marketability. It has investors that are at the table ready to invest, but they have this infrastructure demand and they're constrained there. And so we need to do further research and discussions with them to be able to, and by we I mean city management and the city as a whole, to be able to understand what a parking garage would look like, structured parking would look like there. So the parking garage issue, what's interesting is that in some communities, some municipalities, they have a district that they've put together conceptually. They don't have any actual project that's right there ready. They put together a general roadmap, which is what this is. When we put together the plan, it's just a menu. It doesn't commit the city to anything. It just gives kind of guardrails so that the state knows what to expect. You don't have to go back to the state every single time you want to make a deal and do some sort of infrastructure project. But they don't really have anybody at the door. So there's that model. That was St. Albans. St. Albans had a general idea, but they didn't know exactly what the deal was going to look like. A couple years later, they did a development agreement with the hotel and state office building, and they made it happen. On the other side, Bennington, for instance, already had a deal commitment with their local private entity and said, if TIF passes, this is what we'll do. You guys are in the middle of that, which is there's some will to do a TIF district, but it hasn't been created yet. There's a project that could really use infrastructure help and could support to be able to make this possible and even feasible. but they have to be timed a certain way. So there's a little bit of concurrency happening here, which is where this gets a little bit more complicated, but also more fortunate. So as we looked at this, we said, okay, there's more to be done. There's a lot more to be done. We have to dig in deeper, and we're not prepared to come back with a plan yet, because that's not part of the scope yet. But from what we can tell from these initial readings, this bears out very similarly in proportion to other TIF districts that have been approved. So, and you saw some of those materials in your other confidential materials. So when we went ahead and mapped out where these parcels were, where the projects were located, we actually started with a much bigger map. There were a lot more projects here. We met with VEPSI, we met with the state, and they said, some of these aren't really going to meet the test of the project criteria, the location criteria. So we said, all right, let's shrink it up a little bit. And that's where we got to this outline, this border boundary. And you can see in this map, which is a little further out, that there's also, this is within all of it is within the growth center, and a major portion is within the designated downtown. And that's important. The state cares about that, and I believe that a lot of local people usually care about that as well, because you want to concentrate your growth and your stimulation for development in the areas where you've already done all that planning.
Can I ask you a question about that? Have
Sure.
we just zoned this to draw a line essentially through there, and this part is rural and this is proposed for development? So I'm wondering if
It has to follow property line, John, so it has to follow the property lines themselves. It doesn't require you to do development in those areas. I would say, if the property line changes, if they bifurcate or, subdivide, then you could change that. But there's no real downside necessarily with making it to incorporate that whole thing. But it's a good question, though. So here are some of the questions that legislative bodies have asked of us before, and I'm sure you have several others, but these are the kind of litmus tests that we like to make sure we've hit before we go on to the next step, which is, are these projects, the ones that we're going to talk about more in a moment, in line with your planning and your development goals? And so, we don't want to put something out there that you're not committing to it in the plan, but it should be city supported, so you want to make sure you're comfortable with it. And then, are these the types of projects? Is this the type of infrastructure you could conceive of investing in the next 5 to 10 years? So it is a 5 to 10 year horizon. So that's why some of this gets more and more speculative, but are these the types of projects? And then for our part, we think the next portion of what we'll talk about will kind of hopefully answer this is, are there a sufficient amount of options that you have confidence that we'll be able to come back with a reasonable plan to you in a few months and have a reasonable approach to how you set this up? So our hope tonight, or in 2 weeks, whenever you guys decide, is that we would move forward to phase 2, because we do find this to be a viable district. We need to now spend time gathering more data and putting together the TIF district plan. And how that goes is actually, there's a process with, if we're going forward in the hope that this is going to, become a district, we have to apply to VEPSI with a letter of intent. We have to submit a letter of intent 60 days prior to applying to the state. We have to then we draft the TIF district plan, bring that to the public and to the council for approval, and then prepare the application that goes to the state. And that is the scope of our phase 2. That's why I'm calling it that. That's really what the second half of our contract would be. Now, what I mentioned earlier is about Capitol Plaza specifically, and about a parking solution here. And so what I want to emphasize is that, again, because you guys are in this unique circumstance where you have something very real that's happening as you're also developing the district, these are actually 2 separate concurrent processes. So setting up your district is not dependent on getting a development deal signed. Setting up your district is not dependent on who is actively going to make something happen as soon as you sign the papers. But if that project is one of the projects you want to include, you want to make sure the most current and the most realistic scenario is included in your TIF district plan. Because assuming that gets approved by the state, then you want to be shovel ready and be able to move forward. So we recommend pursuing the development agreement, and pursuing not even the development agreement itself, but the negotiation and the discussion concurrently, so that you have, because you need to include the right information in your TIF district plan. That would be a separate contract, not inclusive in the phase two. Whitenburg has done this for other companies. Specifically, our president, David White, has been the person to negotiate development agreements on behalf of other municipalities. Whether or not you hire us is not the point tonight, but just letting you know that that would have to be a second step, and it would have to be a concurrent step to what we're working on. So just to recap the milestones and timeline, because everyone likes a good timeline, or at least I do, due diligence and development discussions would have to happen over the next 2 months, pending your approval of going forward. In February, we'd submit that LOI, and in February, March, we'd spend time developing that TIF district plan with city management, with stakeholders, trying to get input, hopefully a core team. And then in April, our plan would be to present this to the public. We'd do a public meeting, hopefully, at a city council meeting, ideally, to be able to present it to you and also the public. And then we provide a feedback period so that there's a chance for private property owners who haven't been interviewed yet, who could potentially provide more data and input. And then the final version with all that feedback incorporated gets sent to the council for approval in May, with a short turnaround to submit to the state. And, yep.
Sorry, what's LOI?
Oh, sorry, letter of intent.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Intent. And that's their terminology for that process. And then in May, after we submit, if we can submit by the end of May, we could potentially even be on the agenda for the VEPC hearings in June, and they take 2 to 3 meetings to decide. And the reason we've aggressively moved towards this timeline, which is a little bit intense, we've put a little bit of buffers in there, is because if there's a project you want to proceed with in the very next year, because I'm going to double back. If there's a project you want to proceed with, you might want to be on the November ballot with that project. If there's an infrastructure project you want to do, and in order to be on that November ballot, you have to warn that by September and start the voter education at least in September. So we wanted to build enough time in. And where I was about to go with that is that as soon as the council vote on the TIF district plan, you've started your clock. You've started your TIF district. You now have 10 years from 2018, let's say, to incur debt. Only 10 years, which is not that much time, actually. So you want to make sure you maximize that time. And to start retaining increment, you have to start incurring debt. So all of it happens pretty quickly, and it's not committing you to that just by setting up the district, but I put that out there as a fair warning as part of the legislation. All right, I've talked enough at you for now. If there's any questions on that component before we go into executive session, I thought we'd pause. I need water.
Questions? I think we're all set on the lights. Thank you, John. Thank you for that presentation.
Presumably, if we had something on the November ballot. Sorry, yeah.
Technical question. You needed this for the executive session too, right?
Yes, please. Thank you.
So just keep it up there.
Yeah, I've got another slideshow.
Yeah, anyway, I'm just thinking about our budget process now. Obviously, this is separate from that, and
Yep.
so we wouldn't be anticipating any capital improvement plans for any of this work at this point, right?
Right.
Right.
Right. So this is all separate outside of your operating budget.
Right. Okay.
Yep. Yep, that's the beauty of it.
Other than, to ask Phil this question, the additional fund, so if we're going to proceed with phase 2, we need to enter into the contract with Whitenburg for the next section.
And that would be that's on this
And
current
that's-
budget. We would take that from the same reserves, and then, so I understand that we can take that into,
Yes.
we could roll that into a project.
It's a related cost that you put as an explicit line item when you go to the voters so that they know, and then it's reimbursed by the increment.
Funding yourselves.
All right. Who wants to go into executive session? I have more slides.
All right, do we have any motion to go into executive session? I'm not sure the proper.
Second.
Where
We have a site, so
Yeah, just
we have
a
to
site.
discuss real estate and contractual matters. So you include Stephanie and Gail, and also Sue and Todd.
I move that we find that it would put the city at a substantial disadvantage to have this conversation in public.
Second.
All right, any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. And
I move-
we won't be returning.